In the 14th century, the definition of power was anchored in mud and stone. Sovereignty was a visible, terrestrial construct, measured by the reach of armored cavalry and the thickness of fortress walls. But there was a structural vulnerability in this model. An impenetrable castle and a vast army are only as effective as the supply lines that feed them. If the subjects and soldiers are starving, the king's territorial authority becomes a secondary concern. This map illustrates a different architecture of power, the Hanseatic League. Functioning as a merchant shadow state, this decentralized network prioritized the movement of resources over the static possession of land. They realized that by governing the flow of capital and data, they could bypass the reach of traditional monarchs. The League established a monopoly over the caloric intake of Northern Europe. They controlled the movement of Baltic grain, Arctic stockfish, and the essential salt required to preserve them, effectively managing the primary supply chains of entire nations. When a private entity dictates the arrival of food and preservation agents, the military strength of a kingdom is neutralized. By manipulating a ledger to freeze a nation's food supply, a guild could force political compliance without ever fielding an army. To maintain this influence, the League built a physical infrastructure of contours, fortified counting houses that functioned as extraterritorial enclaves. These hubs operated as states within a state, harvesting data from foreign capitals while remaining beyond the jurisdiction of local law. Inside these enclaves, the guild enforced a strict celibacy protocol. This prevented merchants from forming local familial ties, ensuring that proprietary secrets stayed within the guild rather than leaking out through marriage or inheritance. In a modern context, we would recognize this as a security measure against data exfiltration. The League further secured its network by using Middle Low German as a proprietary accounting grammar. This linguistic barrier created a semantic wall. To a local tax collector or nobleman, the internal logic of the guild's transactions remained unreadable. Secrecy was codified through shadow accounting. Merchants often maintained dual records, a clean version for public inspection by royal authorities, and a private shadow ledger containing the true scale of their wealth and trade routes. This security stack utilized private ciphers and symbolic shorthand to scramble sensitive dates and profit margins. Even if a ledger was seized, the internal intelligence remained protected, rendering the data useless to rivals. This systematic obfuscation provided a definitive strategic advantage. A sovereign king cannot regulate wealth he cannot define, and he cannot tax an event that does not exist in his legal reality. The guild used its decentralized nodes to harvest market data and political intelligence across Northern Europe. By relaying this information back to their supreme assemblies for synthesis, the merchants achieved a level of surveillance that far exceeded the capabilities of any feudal government. This synthesized data allowed for preemptive shipping. By identifying regional crop failures or salt shortages months before they became public knowledge, the League could anticipate a crisis before the local monarch even realized it was happening. The merchants profited from the latency, the time gap between an event and the public's perception of it. They could front-run the market, moving essential supplies into place and resetting prices ahead of the crisis. This predictive dominance was weaponized as a tool of statecraft. By intentionally triggering logistical delays or manipulating price signals through their network, the League could force political concessions from uncooperative kings. By acting on information while the state remained reactive, the League made information a form of leverage more efficient than traditional military attrition. A hegemony built on the artificial scarcity of information requires absolute internal discipline. For the shadow state to survive, the integrity of its communications had to be protected at any cost. This necessity led to the practice of verhansing, a penalty of total economic excommunication for any merchant who leaked internal protocols or bypassed the guild's rules. The mechanism was a threefold system deactivation: stripped of all trading rights, blocked from the secure communication network, and physically banished from the contours. This erasure rendered the individual an economic ghost. In a reality where the League controlled all access to the flow of goods and information, the excommunicated merchant simply ceased to function. The Hanseatic model demonstrates that sovereignty is a function of information control and logistical dominance. Power in the medieval world rested on the secret ledgers kept and the essential supply chains controlled by the merchants in the shadows.